Hello everyone, and welcome back for some more Let's Read the Garden of Avalon. We might actually be finishing it up today, I'm not 100% sure, but I think we are. And so we're moving on to another interlude here, this time the interlude of Sir Lancelot, who, well, lanced a lot, and then, yeah, I think we're pretty much coming up to the end pretty much. So, with that said, let's get going. So, Sir Lancelot. When we arrived to my domain's castle and arrived in my chamber, sleep overtook the queen. No surprise. She had been accused of adultery, brought to a lonely castle, and finally freed from the stone cell where she had been imprisoned, only to await her execution. Arriving at a safe haven relieved the tension built up in her heart, and the queen eventually sank deep into unconsciousness. The stains of tears etched a trace of remorse on her cheek. The queen's sorrow was not from the fact that she had been chased away from Camelot, nor was it that I had stolen her. It was that she had betrayed King Arthur. The marks left on her face were from her constantly apologizing to the king, thinking of how much she must have suffered because of our relationship. My ragged fingers could not even wipe away the traces of her tears. The other knights could not possibly know how much the queen admired the king and supported her to this day. She was called a traitor and unfaithful, suffered infamy of betrayal and infidelity, but her heart remained that of a fair maiden. Even now, while having dreams, she must have continued apologizing to the king. The relationship between the king and the queen was not a normal one. However, it was a relationship that they had accepted as inevitable, founded upon accepting what was out of their power. Had there been no interloper such as I, the king and queen would have continued their lives with their secret preserved. There would have been no fighting between the Knights of the Round Table, and Camelot would have been restored to its former glory. No, this was for the best. This really was for the best. I seated myself on the bed, still in helm and armor. Knowing what circumstances the king was in, I at least owed it out of loyalty to remain in armor until the expedition in Rome is over. The expedition in Rome is over, and the king returns to Britain. This night will be a long one. Until the queen awakes, I reflect on what the queen told me of half the life of the king. It is said that the king who was chosen to be the king of Britain was bestowed with a mysterious power. But the power was fading, and the previous king, Uther, was last to be endowed with such supernatural power. King Uther feared that the next generation would no longer have the supernatural blessings of the British Isle, so he was driven to do something forbidden. He produced a child with his own blood, and the blood of a dragon with human hands. The Magus Merlin accepted King Uther's suggestion, found the most suitable mother for a vessel to blend the two types of blood, and created the ideal king. He did this for the sake of keeping Britain alive. There was no malice in his wish. As a king, it is the right thing to do when you rule a kingdom, to wish for leaving an even stronger successor. The child, born as an incarnation of the dragon, turned out to be exactly what the king and the Maguses hoped for. However, two problems appeared. The first was that the child was a female. The other was that Morgan, the daughter of King Uther, contrary to all expectations, was still a princess who retained the supernatural blood. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Despite being the same offspring of Britain, her younger sister was the one to have received the love and hopes of her father. Morgan hated her for it, and became a witch queen who craved vengeance for all her life. Agravain, too, was an assassin sent by Morgan, and Mordred was... nay, I shall say no more. Morgan is indeed a ruler with immense power, the daughter who has retained the supernatural power that was thought to have died out with Uther. She was the owner of the island Britain itself, and as the Lord of the British Isle herself, she was a greater Lord of the British Isle than King Arthur. But she still was but a small pebble in the path of the king. The witch queen could do nothing to injure the heart of the king, not even a scratch. The problem was the gender of the child that was born. As a result, she was raised as a man, because to rule over so many territories at night, she had to act as a man. The only ones that knew who she truly was the previous king Uther, her foster father Ector, and the Magus. She literally covered herself in iron and sealed the truth for all her life. The sort of selection was something I had heard of. In my own territory on the other side of the sea, I heard many gossips about the King of Britain, a knight chosen by the Magus Merlin. Oh, that is Lancelot. I'm like, why does that look different? And then I'm like, no, that is right. The hero who pulled out the holy sword none could pull out. In the midst of despair in Britain, there was only one light of hope that could defeat all the different tribes of foreign invaders. As a knight, I couldn't help but be intrigued by him. No, I will be frank. I was young back then, filled with passion and conviction. I spent my time pretending that I was not slightly interested in the King of Knights from Britain, increasingly conceitedly believing that this King of Knights in Britain was but rubbish and that I alone was the ideal knight. However, when my own country began to compare me to this King of Knights, I finally had enough with this. I became enraged and decided to measure the so-called legend with my own eyes. Or perhaps it was by the Lord's guidance. I met the king as soon as I landed in Britain in the midst of battle. The sight of a knight with a body that could only be described as a young riding a horse, and fearlessly swinging a sword in the midst of a horde of invaders. A thoughtless person would probably insult the king's appearance and despise him for being so unfit to be a knight. I was one of them. What is required in battle is weight, arm strength, and a tough body, with stamina that can continue fighting day and night, or so I thought. The young's physique would not be enough to even fend off a single barbarian, but I learned how wrong I was back then. The essentials for being a knight is not just a strong body, but a spirit that vows what to train, what to protect with the sword. It was a matter of maintaining an unshakable conviction. In that battle, I fought alongside the king, and because of my accomplishments, I was granted the honor to speak with her as a friend and invited to Camelot as a guest. Before long, I found myself desiring a seat on the Round Table. I've witnessed countless battles as a member of the Knight of the Round Table, just like other knights who were enthralled by their king and idolized that king, unable to see her secrets and her agony, pains, or suffering. It's not that there weren't people who had been suspicious of how the king appeared, of course, but the king who held the holy sword would not be hurt, nor would she grow older. They say that the holy sword has the blessings of the fairy, Lady of the Lake, and the wielder is ageless, immortal. Because of this, no one pursued to investigate the body of a knight who looked too petite, and even the face of what people thought of as a maiden was praised by the knights as a demonstration of how handsome their king was. In fact, the king was also invincible. That's Excalibur. There was no room for his physique or physical appearance to interrupt that. The people who were afraid of the invasion of the foreigners were seeking a powerful king. The knights who rode on the battlefield would follow only a great leader. And the king met all of those qualifications. So in reality, no one was interested in who the king truly was. The fact she would protect the kingdom as its ruler was enough. The new king was fair and impartial, and she always stood at the vanguard on the field of battle, slaying foe after foe. Although countless enemies and many of her people died as a result, her decisions were always in the right, and she governed under these dire circumstances better than anyone else. There is no room for doubt there, and in the end, who among the people being ruled really considers himself as the same person as the king? How could you say that the king does not understand human hearts? Sir Tristan, nay, all the knights of Britain misunderstood with their assumption. Why had it not occurred to any of you that the king, just like the rest of you, was simply another human who called Britain a home? People really pointed out that, that the Sir Tristan's line about the king does not understand human hearts. Yeah, that was a pretty important line for sure. I was a knight from a foreign country. Born on a different soil, the climate and culture I was raised in was different. I mean, it's funny because, yeah, at the time, Britain versus France is like massively different. But now we just kind of lump them together. I mean, I'm Canadian, so I definitely lump them together in many ways. As simply being, not my people. Anyways, an outsider, so to speak. Fundamentally, my thoughts and theirs do not intersect. Boy, he has had many different designs. The Britons put their island and their country above everything else, but I'm a person who puts people first, not the country. I believe in the happiness of the individual over the happiness of the nation. The French knight's creed was that if a woman he loved was in trouble, he would take her hand even if it meant giving up his country. This made me feel uncomfortable, but thanks to it, I was allowed to observe the round table calmly and with a cool head. After Sir Tristan's departure, the king began to show signs of fatigue. The queen was worried about the king, and I, too, was concerned about the weight being placed on the king, causing him heartache. I wanted to ease the king's burden as much as possible, even if only a little. This became a common goal the queen and I shared. We conversed with each other, acknowledged each other with respect, and came to rely on each other. It was true that I was quite attracted to the queen at that point. I found her strength of mind and her willingness to support the king behind his back to be a rare blessing in disguise. The queen's confession of the king's secret was probably because the burden within her had become too large for her to contain. The true identity of the king was revealed to me, and the queen's loneliness became apparent to me, and I realized how immature I was. It was anger that dominated me at that moment. Anger at everything that was pure. I felt an uncontrollable rage towards the island called Britain itself. As I suspected, didn't it? You were never a worthy queen fit for King Arthur, Guinevere. You dare say that, Agravain? The knight who had climbed up the position of secretary knew the true identity of the king. Not only did he know who the king truly was, but he also used it to threaten the queen. The queen's humiliation forced me to make one final choice. I cut my blade through many knights, took the lives of my friends called the Knights of the Round Table, and fled to my own domain. The crime of unchastity was treachery, and I have become a traitor who has fallen so far, becoming a foul beast that could not even call itself a knight anymore. The man deep inside my soul cried out that. That's all fine. This is what I wanted. I have taken the woman I love. King Arthur is a knight who lives up to his ideals. I used to be like that too. But we age. People age. We cannot become everlasting like the king. The time we humans have in order to live up to our ideals is just too short. I am no longer the knight the king expected me to be. What I committed with the queen unexpectedly proved that. I felt relief that the king would know of my disgrace, know the limits of this man, and punish me for my disloyalty. But the king said she would forgive us. The innocent and pure king said that she would forgive me and the queen. My friend, my pride, oh my ideal knight. If you had seen fit to commit such actions, then there must have been sincere causes. I believe in you. When I saw the letter of pardon having those inscriptions on it, I foresaw the end of my own soul burning down from madness. What is this? Did the king not love Guinevere? No, I am certain she did love her. The king trusted the queen as her wife and as her best friend. The king is giving forgiveness to someone who trampled on that trust and friendship and walked far away, abandoning her. Impossible. This is absolutely absurd. She must have been trying to keep her face. Her responsibilities as king bound her to forgive me for my position as a knight. If I rebel, Camelot will really collapse. The king was surely casing her heart in iron and forgiving the traitor that I was, all the while holding the utmost grudge. If only that were true. Had she have been such a mundane person, then I wouldn't have run away at all. Yes, the truth was I ran away because I was afraid. The king was simply giving her forgiveness. She was giving her blessings. to the queen, and myself. As if she was reassured that there would be no better conclusion, the right ending of all things. She really was a king who only wanted to protect her kingdom. After all, she had been hiding her true nature and continuously killing herself for more than 10 years just to do that, protecting her people. If I were in the same position as the king, would I be able to forgive the traitor who wronged me in such a way? No. Such question is, in that premise, is flawed to begin with. The king is different than us in the premise from the very start. She was not a person, and she was never raised as a person, but still, she tried to live rightly as one. A creature who could not experience the happiness as a person, yet one who loved the happiness of the people. She truly is a monster that far surpasses Vortigern. No wonder they couldn't understand her. Is her way of existence not the hell that is portrayed in the minds of humans for their own convenience? What was it that I had been so angered by? Even now I respect and adore the king, but for a human being I cannot. I must not accept her way of being. To whitewash it as too wonderful to be true would make me no better than the knight who had left the castle. Guinevere, is this what has been tormenting you so much? The horror I felt now growing in my heart will one day become anger, then hate, and compel me to continue cursing the king who will continue to exist in ideals for all eternity. It was a horrid future, but it was a fitting punishment for one like me. The night is long. The sun has yet to rise on the horizon. I gaze at the island, which had become a distant foreign land to me, at the once glamorous chalk castle. Dang. Also, that's fan art. That's clearly fan art. That's some boobers she won't have if she's not in her Rongo Miniad form. Anyways, Chapter 4, The Voyage Out. It was a somber dawn. The sunset from the harbor was seen somewhat shrouded by clouds, and the sky was still far from clear. All the same, the sun rays on the horizon were reminiscent of golden ears of rice. Her figure standing on the dock looked even more composed than ever. The harbor was now in an up-and-down frenzy, as a large fleet of ships were preparing to set sail. She and the Magus are having one final conversation on the dock, separated from the hustle and bustle of those at the harbor. And so, the expedition to Rome. Are you going to change your mind, or will your policy remain the same, King Arthur? No change. We will confront them on their land before they come across the sea. First a blow, then we'll make them obey to negotiate. The Magus smiled at her confidence as she said without hesitation that I would beat them first. He did not laugh out of mockery, but from being delighted. Honestly, as always, you hate to lose, don't you? But you can't even see them there, I just realized. You can sort of see them there, just barely. They're off there in the corner. Two of them. But you're right. Rome is underestimating Britain nowadays. They think we are exhausted from the war against the Saxons and that they can secretly sneak in the picture. There's nothing more pleasurable like slapping a man like that in the face and making him fall on his back. Yes. We also have years of complaints here, so of course we won't be merciful and we'll blow them far away. After that, while they still don't know what to do, we'll make them sign a peace treaty. That sounds really good. The Magus smiled, for he knew that her, or rather, King Arthur's intentions would succeed, but your absence is a little worrying. Who are you going to leave this land with? No. Sir Kay, Mordred, and Sir Gawain, who is still recovering. Sir Lancelot's situation will be explained to everyone after this expedition. Really? It turned out to be like this as I expected. The Magus stopped halfway, hesitating to the end, and he avoided telling her the real story. It's true that the Magus did not have eyes that can read the future, but he did have eyes that could perceive the world. He had a clear understanding of what is going to happen next. The cause and effect accumulated so far, due to the absence of the king's expedition, there is a high probability of a certain battle taking place. The king would certainly win the battle in Rome. However, when he returns to Britain, the king will be surrounded by the army of her own country. Mordred, the son of Morgan and the bastard who is also the copy of King Arthur, the knight whose true face is hidden by his helmet, will make his move as soon as King Arthur leaves. Her rebellion is an inevitable fate. But even then, so far so good, there's no problem to be seen yet. No matter when Mordred rises up and rebels, King Arthur can smoothly suppress her and put her down without so much trouble. But this is the only time when the promised victory is not in sight. King Arthur, after the glorious feat of her Roman expedition, might lose her life in the worst war of her life, the battle of killing her own compatriots, wherein her countrymen would try to murder one another. The Magus didn't tell her that fact. Even though the Magus had no humanity, the non-human was worried about the king in his own non-human way. Britain had already reached its limits. To save the country, the king's mission was over. So he thought it was time for her to finally rest. The conversation between the king and Magus continued, though in fewer words. After a few more questions, he said, "Even if this is a country that will soon be destroyed sooner or later. Even if we hold out for another 100 years, it will not have a significant impact on the history of this island. Or rather, let's say it has already fallen. So much for Britain, this is the end." What would you do if I started to say that? In the first person. What does that mean? Huh. I understand the idea of first-person perspective, but that's a weird way of putting it. In the first person, that he had only ever... weird sentence. In the first person, that he had only used in the dreams, he declared the cold and ruthless truth. Perhaps to see the extent she had foreseen this outcome, she replied, as if she's talking to a decade-old friend, "I'll be more furious at your everyday joke. Britain will not be destroyed. That's why I'm going to do what I can do." With a gentle smile, she said what she had to do. "I've decided to fight. Even if I lose everything. Even if I become hated by everyone." The Magus suddenly remembered the events of the day of selection. The dusk when everyone had left. The young girl standing in front of the sword of the king made a resolve. This kind of thing, there is no need to ask such questions now. "Even so I will fight," that is the vow of the king. In front of that rock, the wish of the young girl who was abandoned forever there was engraved. In exchange for her own fate, that young girl wished for the protection of everyone. These must be shots from, Are these shots from Unlimited Blade Works? Still gotta watch that, the anime. That seems right. I've been forgetful recently. I cannot joke about humans. Yeah, it was only a short while ago, but it feels like an eternity. I didn't tell you much about Uther. He's as problematic a man as the vile King Vortigern himself. Well, I, too, was just as much of a problem when I was amused and agreed to Uther's proposal for fun, but it seemed like a right choice at the time, and in fact, it was the best move I could have made. We've created the ideal king. I think it worked, too. But then things didn't go as expected. Our goal was to make an ideal king. Your goal was the happiness of the people. From the start, what we looked at was different. That difference, if only I had noticed it earlier. Merlin. She looked at the Magus with eyes brimming with curiosity. Of course, it's only natural. Even though it seems so obvious now, she didn't understand what the Magus was trying to tell her. She doesn't even know who is confessing to whom now. It felt very painful for the Magus. It doesn't matter. That's all you have to do. The bell of departure rings. The sun rises over the horizon and the ship prepares to leave, never to return. She makes her way to the ship's deck, but the Magus stands still. Sorry, I know it's all sudden, but I will stay here. I made a little mistake. I'm being watched by a vicious fairy with a bad temperament. For the time being, I'll have to hide a bit." She shrugged her shoulders and was taken aback by the Magus's words. After a moment, with a slightly disgusted face, she said, "Really? I've told you so many times to avoid your troublesome relationship with women. That's the only thing that won't change about you, no matter how many years pass." "Well, after all, that's what I live for. What's life worth without flowers? Honestly." To the Magus, who spoke that proudly with a smug face, she smiled very warmly. That's true. The Magus had seen her smile countless times. However, she never smiled for her own sake. When this girl watches people feel happy, she wholly smiles from the bottom of her heart. That's a really nice piece. Thank you, Merlin. I'm grateful to you. You have been a great mentor to me. The parting words were very simple. She did not know her destiny. Therefore, she thought it was just a farewell to a short separation. The Magus felt shy, as if he were troubled by the frankness of the gratitude. It was a compliment that he had heard many times before, but the Magus was struck by an emotion he had never dreamed of and choked on his words. He was unable to say goodbye, unable to return the banter with his usual flirty, fluent, and easy manner. I've never been involved with the opposite sex in the same way you have been, so I can't really put into words what is this feeling. For me, it's always been there, for spending these many years with me, accompanying me. I appreciate you. These times are very valuable to me. Perhaps I might have fallen in love with you." Without a blush on her cheeks or any maidenly shame, she uttered her misguided thoughts, sincerely and wholeheartedly. It was her greatest expression of affection. Of course it was not love. Yeah, this is not her saying that she fell in love. This is something else. For sure. Because she doesn't understand the concept of love yet. This is her thinking like, "Oh, is this love? Dang." It was just a misplaced expression of gratitude, the highest form of gratitude she had ever heard of. For someone who had never been allowed to live the life of a person, she had simply replaced the deepest gratitude she had ever heard in her field with misguided words. The last conversation was over. The ship sailed, carrying the king out to the Golden Sea. The Magus confesses to himself as he watches it disappears. I was a creature who loved only beautiful endings. An inhuman being, cold-blooded like an insect, incapable of feeling even like a non-human. It's not that I'm a human being, but merely look like one. And yet I fell in love with only one thing. A beautiful heart. The Magus cannot understand human love. Artoria, she's yet to know human love. Between the two, they talk about love to each other. Is there a limit to irony? No. Is that just the natural outcome? After all, the two non-human companions wanted to imitate humans. They were never meant to fit together in the first place. Dang. Oh god, and now we're in the Day of Comlin. Oh jeez. Well, here we go. King Arthur had signed a treaty with Rome and was now sailing back to Britain aboard a ship. 2 ships. Hundreds of soldiers had lost their lives in the battle against Rome, but the rewards had been many times greater. The faces of the soldiers on the deck were all cheerful, optimistic, upbeat, and positive. The conflict with the foreign races that had raged for a long period was finally resolved. For the bad harvests of recent years, people can only hope for the blessings of the heavens. But the conflict between humans is finally over. Soldiers, who were really exhausted from their everyday life, are now brimming with hope. She stood in front of the helm, watching the soldiers as they set sail, muttering to each other as if they were saying a chant, "We will somehow manage a way now." There was a slightly distressed shadow on that face of hers, on that face of her that the soldier did not have. Somehow. Yes, at least while I'm still alive. The treaty with Rome can only be fulfilled with the presence of King Arthur. They are not afraid of Britain. They only fear King Arthur. It's a short-lived peace. In reality, it'd be meaningless without the value of the island of Britain itself in the treaty. Even so, she swallowed her fears and uneasiness, hoping, if the people who are suffering from poverty can live in peace, then they'll be arriving on Britain Island soon. She looks up, raises her face to announce his victory to everyone, but notices a strange sight. On the island's shoreline, there was something that should not have been there. Tongues of blaze were rising out of the harbor. A bleeding soldier with a pale face brought forth the summons. Lord Mordred reportedly rebelled. The 7 clans and 8 lords have joined the traitors, and Camelot has fallen. This was the reward she was given for her grand services. Mordred, in King Arthur's absence, took advantage and assembled the rebels. He captured Camelot and positioned himself along the coastline to annihilate the king's army on its way home. This was how it will be told among future generations. The last battle of King Arthur, a battlefield in the twilight, where chivalry had blossomed and died, scattered like flowers. The Battle of Comlin Hill, the gravestone of countless corpses, where so much brilliance was lost. Mordred's army awaited, encircling in a formation for the arrival of the king's army, who were absolutely exhausted from the Roman expedition. It was only with the help of Gawain and Kay that King Arthur and his companions were able to break through the siege and land. When Gawain heard the news of Mordred's rebellion, he pushed through his wounds and rushed to the battlefield. The king broke through the siege with Gawain's help, and survived the absolute crisis thanks to the help of Sir Kay, who appeared out of nowhere with his men to take care of the rear of Mordred's army. Sir Kay was never able to see the king until the end of the battle. King Arthur got a moment and successfully stepped on the land. Many of the lords sided with Mordred, and King Arthur was outnumbered, pushed into a disadvantage of strength. Gawain was killed in a one-on-one duel with Mordred in the first battle after landing. Mordred had no qualms in proclaiming, like King Arthur, I will fight in the battlefield as long as I'm there. But she was wounded in the battle with Gawain, and had to command from the rear for the next day's battle. As a result, the battle turned into a war of attrition. The fellow compatriots of Britain continued to shed blood by tearing each other apart for the next 7 days. Or perhaps the Mordred side actually had their own goal. The reason why they had sneakily targeted the king's return was to behead the king as quickly as possible and get it done with the least amount of sacrifice. But the battle dragged on and kept going. The war spread throughout the entire island, and the land that had barely survived by far was irreparably wounded. As she continuously retreated and pursued the enemies in repeat, touring the land set ablaze, she learned the reason for the rebellion. The soldiers who agreed to stand beneath Mordred's flag rebellion were not united by their hatred for King Arthur. Never-ending war, barren lands, children dying of hunger. They had endured those for a long time, always complaining that they could do no more. I hope you to preserve. I hope you shall endure. Also, there was a scream there. That was what she always told the knights. The king was an ideal one. She asked all of us to live rightly without corruption and cleanly as human beings. If everyone could live rightly without corruption, then, without a doubt, at the end of it all, a prosperous country will arise. However, how much longer? How much longer do we have to endure to receive that reward for our patience? Everyone has already reached their limit. I am the only one who could still bear it. The king was truly an ideal one. However, because she was ideal, she could not measure the weakness of the people. Anyone who could gaze at her objectively at that moment would understand that her heart at that moment was broken. On the 7th day of the war, the fierce conflict between the two armies continued until dusk. Both armies tore each other apart until all that was left were a few lives dimming in the mountain of corpses. In that hill soaked in blood, she recalled the words of a certain knight. The king understands not of the human heart. Acknowledging that, just as the knight said, she tried to grasp her spear, trying to put together the shattered pieces of her broken heart. The holy sword had long since lost its radiance. When her heart broke, the star that shone on the earth froze. At long last, King Arthur, it's been too long. I've been wandering on the battlefield for a long time to reach this point. There were now only 2 knights left on the battlefield. What was in front of the king was an armor of a strange form. The figure of a knight who dragged a sword covered in smokes of boiling blood clarent was like a shape of a ghost itself. The ghost who has robbed the country, killed countless soldiers, and hungered for something that has no form nor shapes, finally spoke. How do you like it? This is the end of your country. It's all over. Over. Whether I win or you win, everything has been destroyed. The Knight of Rebellion kept repeating this word in front of the king. Why? Why are you not giving up the throne to me? Why do you not recognize me as a son? Why was I born in this form? Answer me. Why? The king had no words to answer the knight, nor was she under any obligation to answer him. The last remaining knight of Britain crossed blades. The holy spear pierces, burns through the rebel's internal organs and blows him away. His helmet shatters. The cursed sword of the leader of the rebellion before perishing cut through the king's skull, taking one eye and the rest of her life expectancy. The rebel's body slips from the spear, and she passes away. King Arthur, Artoria, folded her knees. She knelt down, using the no longer useful holy sword like a staff. She looked out over the corpses of the knights that had become a hill. This was the first time anyone has seen her true face, the face probably none desired to see. She wept as she looked down at the ruins of Britain, desperately trying to keep her lips closed. Her breathing choked with sorrow as she tried to stop herself from crying. I fought so many wars and stole so many lives, so that I would die more miserably than anyone else, so I would die hated by everyone. I clearly accepted all that, and yet, she cried out, sobbing. Wasn't it only her who was going to perish? Wasn't it supposed to be only the foolish king who was going to die a foolish death? She complained in a voice that could be scarcely heard by anyone else. Not like this. It's not supposed to be like this. What I was chasing was not for this result. Britain would end one day, that I knew, but I believed it would be more peaceful, like falling into a slumber. It was a passion that even the Magus could never have imagined, a passion that had hidden deep in her heart all this time. It's like the sensation of sorrow and anger that will tear apart the chest of anyone who's listening now, a wail worthy of cursing the entire world. That would be a bad move. Don't voice those words. He spreads his hands, trying to reach out to her, but it was really too far from there. The hero chosen by the Holy Sword, entrusted with the Holy Spear, and burdened with the future of Britain, declares, "This is different. Absolutely wrong. Even if I tolerate my own death, I would never allow the sight of it." The one who heeds the king's wishes and answered to the king, who fell to the ground and was still staring at the sky, was not the planet, but the human order. The planet accepts the end of civilization, but the human order, who had now become the planet's spiritual leaders, continues to reject the end of civilization. It's a defense mechanism for the world of humans created by the collective unconsciousness of the mankind. The sole repository that will forever continue to exist until the end of human order, summoning countless records and countless powers in order to allow the history of mankind to continue. Simply put, a loan shark without limit. If they deem a person as someone who can be useful at making human survival continue, they will give that person opportunities without any limit. To enslave them and use their magical abilities as a tool to maintain human history. In the abyss of disappointment, she definitely heard that voice. We will provide you with an opportunity. In exchange for the fulfillment of your wish, we would own your mortal life by receiving your soul in the afterlife. She probably could not have been aware of what that meant, but even so, the king relied on that power. If she can avoid this sight of destruction, no matter what price she has to pay, it does not matter. The vicious miracle picked up her wish. It was a voice from the world. The messenger fraudulently, deceitfully, and dishonestly claimed it was a miracle. Time and space got distorted. A bottomless, swamp-like source of gravity grabbed her. The king hated the sight of Britain's ruin so much that she rejected her own salvation. For the king, from this moment on, her quest for the Holy Grail began. She had fallen into a pit of an infinite loop of hell, from where there could be no salvation forever. Well, till a certain hero of justice reminds her why life is worth living. But that's a story for another day. Garden of Avalon, back to the flower garden. The familiar chirping of Cathpelegs calling out for him brought the man back to consciousness from his long reverie. Ah, yes, so it seems. I was locked up, wasn't I? Still seated on the rock, the man gazed around. Grey stone walls surrounding the four sides were solid, but there was no hint of subtlety. Simply put, there is absolutely no sign of beauty in it. It becomes obvious that the weaver who created this cage isn't very skilled at delicate work. Ah, good grief. This must be why men get so fed up. I think perseverance is an indistinguishable virtue for both men and women, really. The man picked up his staff that was slung over his shoulder, knocked the ground with a soft sound. A sound of a faint clunk rang out. In an instant, bright colors, filled with vividness of receding waves, changed the look of the stone walls. Deserted earth surface turned into a sea of blossoming flowers. Messy stone wall became a wall of black iron with not even the slightest gap. The structure became more solid and became a minaret. Minaret? That's a word that I've never heard before. That would not be freed nor destroyed, even at the end of the world. There existed no door that could be used as an entrance or exit. I guess that's about it. I can't say it's a punishment without this level of punishment. The man was originally a creature that was supposed to be out of touch with the world, but now he is truly out of touch with everything. It's like a forgotten dream. No one will call on him anymore, and he won't die. Even if this man is treated as a hero by the people, he will never be counted on, nor relied upon as a heroic spirit. Well, of course, unless the humanity gets incinerated, in which case that might actually allow it to happen. After all, he is not dead yet, and even an end like death from consequences has parted way from his fate, an absolute requirement for summoning heroic spirits, whether in the past or future. Only those who have accepted death become the foundation of human order. Oh, interesting. Okay, that's new. I didn't actually know about that. Huh. That's why this man cannot go anywhere. The Magus inadvertently chose to stay here alone, to live and witness his own sins as they unfold as he felt at that time. It's for the better, the man thinks. If mixing a dragon with a human is full of sin, then an incubus as a son of a human is also wrong. It's because of that half-assed human side he has become so strange. Only the sinless, they say. But he really wants to complain about a couple things about them. If he had just been born as just an incubus, he wouldn't have had such harsh feelings. But you are different. You have to think carefully about these things, and you have to choose between selfishness and selfish desire. But it wasn't all that bad. Because of his position as a human and his body as a human being, the man was able to have his own sense of value. Since the incubus is a creature that is parasitic to mental activity of his sentient body, cannot have any sustainable, long-lasting values, The aesthetic sense, sentimentality, and feelings of incubus change with the parasitic brains, so this was an interesting way to live. Half decadence, half longing. The only incubus on this planet who can have a notion of life work or concept of vocation. The man seated himself on the rock and peered through the window, gazing at the hill of destruction. The man realizes that the exact state she has fallen into. What the king's words evoked is a mechanism called the counterforce. Counterforce is something very different from the Throne of Heroes. It's a defense mechanism born of the collective unconscious of humans to enslave them in order to keep the human order alive. There are those who think of it as the voice of the Lord, their God. Others feel it as the voice of the world. Either way, the result is the same on both sides. Those who comply with the will of the counterforce would be enslaved and used forever as guardians after death. That's the difference between hero and guardian. The difference between a heroic spirit and a guardian, although they are both spirits of the throne, a heroic spirit is summoned by people's hope, while a guardian is summoned by people's despair. Those who become a hero not because of their own merits, with his own sins the person who becomes a hero because of his own merits, and with his own sins is not bound by the counterforce. However, those who were powerless, those who mourned their powerlessness while they lived and sought more power to surpass what they have, are trapped by the counterforce. Counterforce offers a contract of equivalence, a contract for a price. A miracle is given to a person who is grieving over his or her helplessness, and that person is temporarily made into a hero. The price is to buy the soul of that false hero after death. In other words, that means completion of a soul that can no longer be saved even after death. The king is already a hero, and has proven herself as one for a long time. Thus, she was always beyond the reach of the hands of the counterforce. That, as long as she accepts her death, as long as she accepts her death and takes her hands off that sword. But she made a wish. She wished for Britain's salvation. No, rather the salvation the people lost. And that was the result. The king stopped still in the hill of Comlin. She was summoned to every age and all eras from the abyss of death, pursuing the Holy Grail countless times. Strange as that may seem, she is now a living, breathing heroic spirit. It is not that she obtains the Holy Grail just by becoming a heroic spirit, but in order to obtain the Holy Grail, only in response to the voice of the counterforce that she didn't need to, she was turned into a heroic spirit. Once she obtains the Holy Grail, the contract will be completed. After her death, she will continue to fight as a guardian. The man thought, even if that's the case, then so be it. I can't help it. After all, this is her life. The role of a guardian may be suitable for her too. However, there was one thing he could not accept. The girl wished for the Grail, even without giving second thoughts. He does not need to guess what the girl would want. One day she will definitely get her hands on it, and wish to redo the day of selection. That would be a denial of her own existence. A contract that would erase all the battles, pains, and sufferings she has gone through so far. Something that would pretend the days the girl Artoria fought for did not happen. Pretend that the girl who is now grieving never existed. This is the only wish that even the non-human Magus can tell is mistaken. I'm sitting on a rock, looking out through the window. I have no fingers to stretch there, nor any hands to reach there, so I just stare at the hill of destruction. Will King Arthur follow the path of the Guardian? Will she still be a slave after her death? Will she sacrifice herself and fight repeatedly the battle that will keep killing herself? Is such an ending the only one she can be given? When I realized it, I found myself concentrating my whole body and looking at her without moving a muscle. I knew what she is capable of. No matter what happens, she will definitely get her hands on the Holy Grail. Once she obtains that chalice, her wish will come true. I didn't realize until now how painful it was to have to wait, or how painful it was to wait for an inescapable future without salvation. Time does not exist in the flower garden, but now it seems as if even that had stopped. Every second feels like an unbearable eternity. Each second feels like a moment from where I want to turn my eyes away. And then, after a long, really long time, the girl took her hand off the holy sword. She did not surrender her mortal life, and no longer did she despise her own life. With a peaceful, gentle smile, she accepted the foolish ending. Yes, sir! I feel so happy I could stand up in joy. The familiar at my feet rushes all over me. Beautiful. What miracle is this? What is going on in this world? I never thought it would end like this. I could not know what happened, but the story finally came to an end. After a long search for the Holy Grail, she was satisfied with her fate. Huh. That's a nice... that's one of the few times where I truly feel like, wow, we did it. We accomplished fate. She did not drop out because she was tired of fighting, nor did she give up. The curse of the counterforce would not go away like that. She undoubtedly got her hands on the Grail, and then rejected it, out of her own free will. Looking back, it was a long journey. Choices were made, mistakes were made, and we never got to where we wanted to be. The maiden's struggle will soon be forgotten. This country will also become a relic of the past. But even so, the battle was meaningful and worth it. No matter what anyone says or who says it, the king chose the best path. Even if it was destroyed, there is no mistake in the ending. Her life had been something to be proud of, a life worth boasting about. If she had accepted that in the end, there is no more need for me to leave. What you dreamed of setting out to do, things you left behind, things you gave me, all of them are my reward. More than enough to decorate this little garden of mine with many colors, for a magus whose time is over. Well, I have to admit I'm pretty sad that I'm the only non-human left all alone now. I was really shocked that the stubborn girl would admit defeat. She must have had a very strange encounter. I can't tell which era it was after all. All I can see is the present. If I could see the future, at least I could rejoice in the outcome. The man stretches his back and sits down on the rock. As one last attachment, the magus remembered the words of parting. Thank you, Merlin. I'm grateful to you. You've been a great mentor to me. At that time, I was shying like an embarrassed child. Not out of joy, but it was so painful I could only smile like that. The words of gratitude that I was so used to hearing so many times as a sage turned out to be a heart-wrenching arrow through the chest. That was a truly troubling time for me. I didn't know there'd be times when such insignificant words could sound so painful. That too was a repercussion of my deeds. The magus shrugs his shoulders in agreement. I've already seen what I needed to see. No, I've seen more than enough. Something much more beautiful. It's time to put an end to wandering around the human world like a rootless seed. The man was given a small, palm-sized piece of land, most distant prison in the world, closed in the far corner of the world. However, an unchanging garden of memories that blooms more flowers than anywhere else, like no other place in the outside world. Garden of Avalon, the Garden of Paradise. A man who has forgotten death awaits until the end of the star. Dang. Come on, run along now, Cathpleague. I'll be fine here. You're free to go. Go and make contact with that which is truly beautiful. Without any deep feelings, the magus let his last roommate go through the window. He was not a human, thus he did not consider this way of being by himself to be lonely. If he ran out of things to do, he would always talk about the beautiful painting. Fortunately for him, there are fairies outside the tower, so he doesn't have to worry about the shortage of listeners. The magus would never be bored of gazing out the single window through which he could see the world. And thus the story of the king became one to be told, even throughout the far corners of paradise. Oh, there's a manga panel. Send them out. Yep. I think that's interesting. Go contact with that which is truly beautiful. That's an interesting one. So we still don't really know when Fu joined Caldia. We really don't, right? Drama CD exclusive, Fate Stay Night, Fate Route ending. If you got to the end of the Fate Route at least once and are familiar with the story of Artoria's Grail quest, you're welcome. Otherwise, there are spoilers. Well, hey, I'm all good there. Last one. Garden of Avalon, continuation of the dream, story of knights, Sir Bedivere. The war was over. Her final battlefield, the war which had split her country in two, lowered its curtain with the king's victory. The night runs, the battle is over. The evening sun, red like blood, had sunk down, and now the dark of night rules the battlefield. The hill buried in corpses is filled with curses, and they howl their resentment, trying to take the survivors with them. In the midst of that, the knight runs, panting. A bridle is held in his hands, and a wounded white horse earnestly follows him. The survivors are the knight and that white horse, and the lone king laying face down on the horse's back. Majesty, King Arthur, this way. He's probably wounded himself, but the knight runs across the battlefield as fast as he can. The king that he serves is gripped in the clutches of death. Although he had vanquished the enemy king at the conclusion of their duel, the king himself had taken a fatal wound. The wound was hopeless, even to the knight's eyes. The king that he had served will greet death before long. Please, stay awake. If we reach that forest, surely. He desperately calls out to her. Or perhaps the knight might have thought it to be true. That their king was immortal. That as long as he had the guidance of the holy sword, the king would never fall. Panting, climbing over the hill of corpses, the knight aims to the forest unsoaked in blood. He knew of the king's deathlessness, and so he believed that if he could leave the cursed battlefield and reach some place pure, perhaps the king's wounds would heal. No, he could not but believe that. Unlike the other knights, he believed in his king. Isolated at court, shunned by the knights, feared by the people. He had even felt pride in the young king who was always the ideal, who even in that predicament never showed any personal feeling. He hadn't served the country, but it was because the king who asked. He had entrusted him with his sword, strove to be his strength, and risen to the king's guard despite his young age. The masked king who never showed his true face. The boy who never spoke his personal feelings, who strove always to be fair, impartial, and selfless. Gotta be careful, don't make the mistake between selfless and selfish again. Made that one earlier. Accidentally called, frickin' Sir, not Mash, why can't I think of his name? Why can't I think of the Sir, not Gareth. Not Gawain. What's happening? Why can't I think of the name of it? I'm not quickly Googling it. What are you talking about? Bash, Kyrie, Light, Spirit. It's freaking Galahad. That's his name. Why couldn't I remember that? Too many G's. Because there's also Garrus. Like, calm down. I accidentally called him selfish when the line was selfless. That one gets me. Sometimes I see self and then the S, and then my brain doesn't read the rest. Anyways, he had hoped that perhaps if he got close to him, that he would be able to see the king's true face. All he wanted was to see the king's real face. Not the face he showed at the castle or on the battlefield. He had wanted to see his true face, smiling as a person. At court when the king released from his duties, surely he would see it. Even the most perfect king can't steel himself from morning until night. But that idea had been wrong. What he had learned was in truth opposite his expectations. Trusted to be one of the king's guards, he came to guard the king closely. Standing by, closer than any of the other knights, he continued to watch the king's behavior. And yet not even once had he seen his king smile for his sake. Just when was it that it made him angry? The king who had accomplished such great deeds, who should have sat in the midst of glory, in truth, had never once shown a peaceful expression. He couldn't forgive that. He had wanted to believe that it couldn't be so. And so, he had wished that one day light would be rewarded to the king's soul, that he had yet to be accomplished. The king was still alone, and so the knight continued to reject the king's death. He cannot let it end here. That with this there would be far too little rewards for such a king. Majesty, please stay here for now. I will go and call the soldiers. In the forest they reached. The knight leans the king against a great tree. It is a race against time. No matter how hard he pushes the horse, it is still half a day to the port where they left their army. Whether the king's life will last until dawn can be seen at a glance by anyone with eyes. Please have patience until then. I swear I will return with the soldiers. Bowing to the already unconscious king, the knight returns to the horse. Bedivere. Before that, the king who should have been unconscious spoke the knight's name. Majesty, you're awake. Yes, I dreamt a while. Yo, shoutouts to the dub of this scene, which gave Bedivere a very feminine voice. A faint voice, but to the knight, that voice sounded incredibly warm. Dreamt, you say? He calls out questioningly. The king's consciousness is faint. If he doesn't reply like this, no doubt he will slip back into the darkness. Yes, I've not had many dreams, but it was a valuable experience. Then, please, pay no mind to me and rest. While you do, I will go and call the soldiers. The sense of a gasp, as though there was something surprising about the knight's words. Majesty, have I done something to offend you? No, I was surprised at your words. Is a dream something you can see even after you awaken? Not a different dream. If you close your eyes, will the same things appear again? This time it was the knight's turn to be surprised. After his words caught in his throat, even as he knew it was a lie, he replied, Yes, if you think on it strongly, I'm sure you can continue to see the same dream. I've had such an experience myself. There is no such thing. In the first place, a dream is something you can only see once, not something that can continue. Even so, he lied, and apologized that this was the first and last time he would ever lie to his king. I see. You're learned, aren't you, Bedivere? The king whispered as though in admiration. Head hung low, he didn't even look up at the knight. The king, breathing so faintly that he no longer even knew what he was doing, quietly. Bedivere, take my sword. In a hoarse voice, he gave his last command. Listen, you will leave this forest and cross over that blood-soaked hill. Beyond it, there's a deep lake. There, cast in my sword. Majesty, that's... The knight knows just what that means. The sword of the lake. To relinquish the sword that was the proof of kingship, that he had protected the king until now, would mean the end of the king that he has served. Go. When you have done it, I want you to return here and tell me what you have seen. The king's words don't change. The knight took the holy sword in hand. Unable to cut through his doubts, he crossed over the hill. And so, the knight crossed over 3 times, and each time hesitated to return the sword. There certainly was a lake, but he was unable to cast the sword into it. If he casts the sword away, the king will die. Holding his king dear, and unable to discard the sword, he turned on his heel and returned to the king's side. The king repeated to the knight. To the knight, lying that he had thrown away the sword, he only replied, Obey my command. To disobey the king's command was, to the knight, the same as a mortal sin. Even so, twice he crossed over the hill and disobeyed that order. Each time he faced the lake, he held the king's life too dear. But that, too, came to an end. The knight, realizing there was no longer any changing the king's will, on the third time he cast the sword into the lake. The holy sword returned to the lake. A white arm appeared from the surface of the water and caught the sword, and after it twirled 3 times toward the sky, the holy sword vanished from the world. That's interesting. A white arm, huh? That's interesting. Is that the Lady of the Lake? Is that Nimue? Nimue? Something like that? I only know from Sonic and the Black Knight. And so, the knight accepted it. The king's end. That such a long duty would end here, like this. When he crossed back over the hill for the third time, the forest was lit by the morning sun. The remains of the battle are far away. There's no sign of the blood-soaked battle, and amidst the pure and light morning mist, I have cast the sword into the lake. The sword was certainly claimed by the Lady of the Lake. Now there we go. At the knight's words, the king opened his eyes. I see. Then you shall be proud. You have obeyed your king's command. At that voice, welcoming death, the knight quietly nodded. Everything has ended. From here, the unrest plaguing their country will no doubt continue. The war is not yet over, and before long the day of ruin will come. But the king's battle ends with this. She, fulfilled her duty to the end. The light disappears. With everything finished, perhaps she lost the last strength that remained to her. I'm sorry, Bedivere. This sleep will be a little long. As though she was slowly falling asleep, she closed her eyes. The rays of dawn's light spilled onto her. The forest stood quietly, and his king fell into sleep. The knight watches over her. The sight of the king he had longed to see. The lonely king, attended by a single knight. But her face was what he had wished for. A peaceful sleep. At her end, the king gained a peace she had never had before now, that made him happy with all his heart. Thanking whomever it was who had given her that peace, the knight proudly stood guard over her. Heaven is distant, and the clearing sky is blue. With this, the battle is truly over. Do you see it, King Arthur? His whispered words ride the wind. And the king, fallen into sleep, as though sinking into an endless blue. The continuation of your dream? Saw a distant dream. Okay. The battle is over. Let us put our swords down and rest in the momentary peace. After dozing in a warm dream, a new day will dawn. The days continue on, and we are still following the same star we once saw. Finn. Oh. Okay. Gotta just... Whew. Just gotta... Okay, get those off my face, get those off my cheeks. Okay. Oh. Alright. So, absolutely, a large part of the reason that it hit me so hard at the end there, and it did, is like, with the knowledge of everything in Fate Stay Night. Just bring back those memories, man. Yeah, that got me, right? Thinking about all that got me. It did. It did. But that is the end of Garden of Avalon. So, okay, sources for the official art: the Garden of Avalon novel, CD drama, Fate Stay Night visual novel. Right, Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works TV. I haven't watched that yet. That'll be later. Fate Zero TV I've seen. The Fate Zero specials I think I've seen. Return to Avalon, I have that. Fate Grand Order, Complete Material Apocrypha. And then, yeah, we got a couple fan-made artworks there, which are actually real good ones. I do like them. Yeah, okay. Well, that was the Garden of Avalon. Yeah, it was short. It was definitely short, and I feel like there's like it was a nice reminder of what's all in this backstory, and I feel like a good reminder of some of the stuff we'll be facing in the upcoming Avalon Lostbelt, right? But as for people, I don't know. I can't see anything that people are saying like this is mandatory reading. It's super important for the upcoming stuff. I feel like most of this I picked up with clues from like Grand Order and through, all the stuff, but we'll see. We'll see. There's a couple interesting things there. It doesn't even go fully into stuff that I expected it to. Like, I don't know, I expected more about like, where Mordred came from. Cause we through context clues and stuff, we put it together. But I don't know, I was expecting that to be more fully, detailed? I don't know. But regardless, this was a good read. I do think, yeah, this is kind of not the best translation. That's one of the things dealing with these fan translations. Some of them are awesome. Some of them are not. Apparently there is another translation of this that's out there. That some people said could have been also recommended. This is the one I had downloaded, and PDFs are much easier for me to do readings of, so that's why I chose this one. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Next up, continuing because right now we got in FGO, we got an event rerun that's going to be holding us off for a bit. So while that's going on, we have 2 movie commentaries coming up, and that is going to be the Camelot duology. So very excited to watch those. Dubbed, of course, because I'm that type of guy. Yeah, we'll see you guys for that next time. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for listening to me crying, because that's always fun. You get to listen to the weakness in my heart. It's wonderful. I certainly enjoy opening myself up to the internet. And all it takes is one person to say like, oh, what a little piss baby, and then I feel awful. But thankfully, most people are like, yeah, no, you did. That's understandable. So thank you all. And we'll see you next time for some more Fate Nasuverse reading stuff. Ciao.